John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 42, but a little recap on what's been going on. So we have just finished the Jamie Delano run of Hellblazer. That's issues 1 through 40. At the end of that run, we learned that all the bad stuff that had been going on in John's life was due to a curse, and he was able to overcome that curse, and it seemed like his life was going to be on the upturn until last issue, which is the first issue of Garth Ennis' run, where we find out that John Constantine has cancer. He's finally gotten over his curse, and the magic world seems to be okay with him, but now the physical world's throwing him a curveball, and he has terminal lung cancer. So the last issue was all about him finding out about it and how he found out about it, and then him deciding that there's not much he can do other than try to use magic to fix it. And that is where we left off with issue 41. So first things first, with issue 42, we got the cover here, and we are looking at a very, very bright red sunset along a coastline. There's a lighthouse, and everything looks pretty normal until you look down at the water and you see the shape of a demon, Satan, something with horns. And just like issue 41, there is like a weird cut in into the picture of John Constantine's face as if he's interrupting this scene. And we also see that this issue was written by Garth Ennis with art by Will Simpson and inks by Mark Pennington. And we start off on the first page, and John Constantine is getting seasick. He is on a ferry and he's sitting at a table by himself watching the other passengers. And one of the passengers comes up, and the passenger has a food tray, and it seems like the passenger sees that John is sick, and that is why he's sitting down. He sets his food down, and it's all greasy and gross. And the guy sits down all smug, like he knows exactly what he's doing. And the narration from John says, "Shit, eggs, bacon, tomatoes, sausages, islands in a sea of grease. You bastard." And then he stands up, and he runs over to the railing, and he begins to vomit. And then we get a full page splash of him standing up, all wobbly, after he throws up, and we see the name of this issue is A Drop of the Hard Stuff. And when we go to the next page, we see that the ferry has arrived at its destination, which is Ireland. And as John disembarks, his narration says, "Haven't been in Ireland since '83, and that was the last time I saw Brendan Finn too. I'd actually forgotten about the old nutter until I started thinking about who could help me with my problem, the sodding lung cancer." He sounded a bit under the weather on the phone. Glad to hear from me, though. I didn't tell him what I wanted then, but he said he needed a favor anyway. So off we go again on the magical mystery tour. I could do with a bit of magic right now. Gotta be better than chemotherapy. And underneath that narration, we're seeing John hail a cab and go to a place called Killiney. And with no time, they arrive to this place, and John directs the driver to a lighthouse, and he gets out of the car, and the lighthouse looks kind of dilapidated, and John looks up at it, and the narration says, "Shay Finn. He loves it out here. Peaceful enough so he doesn't get disturbed at whatever lunatic spells he's up to these days. I'll bet the place is full of booze too, just as it always was." So John goes up to the door and he knocks on it, and instantly his buddy Brendan opens it and says, "Ah, John, how's it going?" And as John walks in, Brendan says, "I thought you'd arrive before dinner, but there's time for a drink first." And as John goes further into Brendan's house, we see that the walls of this place are just covered in liquor bottles. And John says, "You're still a connoisseur of the finest liquor, I see." And Brendan answers, "This lot's not bad, but I've got the best stuff hidden around the place." And even though it's not the best stuff, Brendan still breaks out some whiskey and pours them some shots, and they take their first drink. And immediately after that, John sits down on the couch, lights a cigarette, and looks at Brendan and says, "So Brendan, the business?" And Brendan says, "That'll keep for a while. Haven't we a bit of catching up to do? And John doesn't really want to take the time to catch up. He doesn't have much time anyway because he's dying, but he does decide to go along with it, and the narration says, okay, mate, I'll let it go for now. So Brendan sits down at the couch next to John, and they begin to talk. And one thing to note is that Brendan always has a bottle in his hand, and even though they've just taken their first drink a couple panels ago, in the last panel of this page, we see the bottle is fully tipped up as if it's completely empty into the glass of Brendan. And as they're talking, John is looking at Brendan and realizing something's not right. The narration says he's not looking so good. He's pale and drawn. His face is a spider's web of burst blood vessels. The never-ending booze, I suppose. How much does he drink? But that thought is interrupted by Brendan asking, you still seeing that one from New York then, Anna? And John thinks to himself, Christ, it has been a long time. And then John answers Brendan, Emma, Brendan. Emma. No, I'm not. She died. And I could be wrong about this. I haven't double checked, but I think that's the girl who died in the Swamp Thing run when she got killed by the Involce painting. She was like a painter in New York, and she was painting a weird creature called an Involce, and it actually came alive and threw her out of her window. And that was during the Alan Moore run, right in the middle when John Constantine shows up for the first time. So once John brings up that Emma died, that kind of leads the conversation to more deaths that happened. Brendan says that he heard about John's dad in the paper. And to that, John takes a drink. And when he finishes, he says, haven't been having much luck in the past couple of years, to tell you the truth. With friends, I mean. Richie and Gary died and all. And then Brendan says, Jesus. Well, I'm not doing that well myself, it has to be said. Tactful soul that you are, John. I notice you've not mentioned Kit. And John says, I thought you'd get around to it in your own time, you know? And then we get this great panel of Brendan's face just staring straight ahead. I mean, it looks thoughtful and sad, but it also looks very like apathetic and despairing. And he says to John, she's away. Gone 4 years now. But then as if to change the subject, he says, oh, enough of that grinning and misery. Come on down to the cellar here. Something to show you. So they reach the end of the stairs and Brendan opens the door to his giant cellar of liquors and wines. And Brendan says, not bad, is it? There's wine from all over the world in there. And then he holds his hands up around his face and he says, like, almost reverently, just look at it, John. Look at it. Bloody bottled sunshine. And John looks at him with a smirk and says, bottled liver failure, more like it. And to this, Brendan does like a mock prayer to God and says, forgive him, Lord, for he knows not what a Philistine he is. And then Brendan walks over to like a keg in the wall and he picks it up like it's nothing. So it's kind of like a false keg that's there. And it was in front of a trap door. And Brendan continues, in all seriousness though, John, this means something to me. Look, you've got your magic and your trickery and your scams, and I know you love it. Just seeing how much you can get off with each time. You live for it, right? It's almost like a religion for you. I used to be the same, sure, but I got tired of it. It costs you more as you get older, and you're wondering if it's worth the bother. So I stopped the magic, and I found a religion of my own. You think about it now. When you're gathered around a table in a pub with good friends and good drink and good chat, why in the name of God would you want to go to church? And the whole time he's saying this, he's like walking around, he's opening that trap door, he's getting a couple things, and then he's leading John through the trap door, down a ladder, and into a very dark tunnel. And Brendan turns on a flashlight, and we see the tunnel has like those mine supports of like wood that go around the outsides of it. And he says, I found this wee cave here not long after I bought the tower. Well, to be honest, I was rightly one night and I fell through the bloody floor, but you know what I mean. I did all the work myself. I wasn't about to let some construction worker in on what I'd found, was I? And as they're walking, John's face looks more and more concerned. There doesn't seem to be an end to this blackness. But eventually they do reach the end. And as they do, Brendan turns on a light switch because apparently he ran power down here. And it illuminates a giant room that's got stone carved walls, and the floor looks like cut stones that have been set in a nice pattern. And in the center of the room is a pool of water. So as they walk in, Brendan says, I checked up on the manuscripts in the Trinity Library, and it appears old St. Patrick stopped here on his travels. Would you believe? He must have blessed it as a shrine, John. It's holy water. So John walks into the room, and he goes over to the pool, and he puts his hand in it, and I guess he can confirm by just touch that this is in fact holy water. And as he's doing that, Brendan is in the background, and he's setting up some kind of altar, and then Constantine goes over to see what he's doing. And Brendan is drawing on this altar a pentagram, and he's putting candles at each of the 5 points of the pentagram. And when John sees this, he's like, what? Jesus, what the hell are you up to, Brendan? And Brendan says, keep your hair on. Make yourself useful and open that bottle. And surprisingly, John does go over and listen to what he says. He goes to the bottle and he begins to open it. And the narration for John says, I've had more to drink than I thought, or I wouldn't be going along with this. Fairly simple changing spell from the sound of things. It keeps going as long as the candles do. So Brendan finishes his spell, whatever it was, and they stand in front of the pool and John looks at it and goes, what's all that? And Brendan looks at him with a smile and says, shush now. We'll save the wine for later, I think. Make a nice chaser. And then Brendan goes over to a box that looks very fancy, but he pulls out 2 pint glasses. And John's still not quite sure what's going on. He says, chaser? And then Brendan takes the pint glasses and goes over to the pool of holy water in the middle of the room. But the water has changed. It is now brown. It looks frothy. And Brendan bends down and fills up the pint glasses and he says, Jesus changed it into wine, but I've got all the wine I could ever want. And we are an island after all. So basically, Brendan has done a spell to change this holy water into a holy Guinness. So he hands John the pint, and John says, I don't believe it, you sodding cheeky bastard. Stop the magic, my arse. And by the time John finishes that sentence, Brendan has already drank the first pint, and he looks at John and he says, typical Englishman, talking when he could be drinking. Try your pint, son. And as John drinks it, we get some amazing narration that makes me want to drink a Guinness. It's so good. But the narration says, perfect. It's perfect. The black and the white are parted by a razor blade slash of pure genius. And the whole thing slides down like cream, sharp and smooth in liquid symphony as the taste rolls over the back of my throat. Feels like heaven. And as John finishes, Brendan looks at him with a smirk and says, good? And John says, good? Brendan, it's the best I've ever tasted. Get us another, will you? Have one yourself while you're at it. So as Brendan gets a second glass for them, John walks over to Brendan and says, gorgeous as it is, mate, you must be off your head. I mean, magic's not meant for this. You'll get yourself in trouble. And as Brendan hands John the second pint, Brendan says, so what is magic for, would you tell me? Come on, like the devil will come to get me for making a magic stout. And then we turn the page and it just cuts to John and Brendan on the floor, drunk off their ass. And the narration says, 7 or 8 pints. Feels like a dozen. Loosens the tongue a bit. And John is talking to Brendan and he's telling him everything that's going on. And he says, and I thought you might know a way of getting out of it. I'm not all that keen on stuffing it, mate. And then Brendan looks at him and says, you want me to, you think I might know some spell or something? Cure cancer? And John says, that's it, all right. And then Brendan gives a little chuckle and then he looks at John and he gives him a tap on the cheek like a soft punch. And John's like, what? And then Brendan begins to laugh maniacally. And this pisses John off, so he yells, what the hell's so bloody funny? I'm sodding dying. And Brendan stops laughing when he sees this and he says, John, dear God, John, you want me to save you with magic, right? Cure your cancer? And then he looks at John with kind of like a sad, serious face and he says, John, old son, I was going to ask the same thing of you. I'm dying, mate. The liver's packing up on me. Probably tonight. And then we cut to them drunk off their ass, maybe a half hour later. I don't know. They just continue to drink after this moment. And we see that Brendan is like singing and John can barely stand and he's leaning on Brendan, like practically hanging off of him. And the narration says, that does it, of course. All we can do now is get rat-arsed. And to hell with a lot of it. I'm dying, Brendan's dying, I can't help him, he can't help me, and God help both of us if he can be bothered. I pinned all my hopes on Brendan, and I'm sure he did the same thing with me. And what a waste of time it all turned out as. And thank Christ we did it, because I'm pissed and I'm happy with my mate. Thank bloody Christ. So sometime after Brendan is done singing and John gets a little bit more on his feet, Brendan looks at John and says, right then, time for another? And John says, I'll do my best, Brendan. I'll do my best. So Brendan gets another pint for them, and he says, you will indeed. You'll have one more pint of perfect stout with me before I go, John Constantine. Cheers. And they both slam the last pint, and then Brendan kind of leans against a wall and begins to sit down, and he says, I'll have a wee sit down, John. Bit tired, you know. You, can let yourself out, can't you? And then John walks over to give Brendan a bro handshake, and as they do, Brendan says, see you soon. So it seems that Brendan has spent all night with his best friend John drinking himself to death, knowing that he was about to die from liver cancer. And this is confirmed on the next page as John walks out of that cellar, and the narration says, "I'm drunk and dying. I've just lost another friend." And then he walks up the second set of stairs out of the wine cellar area and is going into the living room, and he says, "Jesus, I'm really drunk. Maybe lie down. I'm glad it happened the way it did. Good way to say goodbye. As the man himself said, why would you want to go to church? I hope he's happy wherever he..." And then his thoughts are interrupted by something. It's a feeling he gets because the narration says, "Hair standing up on the back of my neck, needles creeping along my spine, and the smell. Jesus, the smell. I want out of here now. Oh, Jesus, I want out, but it's too late." And John thinks this right as he's about to exit the front door. But before he can get there, the door swings open and there's a man standing there. And he's a very dapper looking man. He's got a black suit on, but there's a light behind his head which kind of gives him a halo. And the guy just stares at John as John stares back at him. No words are being said until the dapper man says, "It isn't necessary that you would invite me in, but it would be simple decorum." And as John's stammering, trying to get words out, asking like, what does he mean? What is this guy here for? The man says, "I'm looking for Mr. Finn, just below the wine cellar, And John's able to get out, he isn't in any sort of state to talk." And the man says, "He doesn't have to be. I'm not here for his wit. I'm here for his soul." And as the man says that, he just walks past John and into the house, and he proceeds to go straight down to the cellar. And John follows him down, and he uses the excuse saying, "Look, mate, I'll stick around, okay? I don't know what the deal is, but I want to see it's all done properly." And then the man opens the trap door that he knew was there and walks down into that tunnel area below. And as he does, he says, "Naturally, what else would one expect from John Constantine?" And to this, John says, You know me?" And the man says, "Of course. I've made your father's acquaintance too, actually. Your dad is condemned by his hatred for his own son. He's in hell." And then the guy smirks at John just as he's getting to the end of the tunnel into the room where the Holy Guinness is. And the last thing this guy said to John really pissed him off. We get some narration where he's kind of holding in yelling or a scream, and he says, "That's it. You're not getting away with this, you smug bastard. One way or another, you got my friends and you got my dad, but not Brendan. Not this one. This one deserves to get away, and he will. Drunk as I am, I'll see to it. You'll be sorry you pissed me about, you piece of shit." And in that last bit of narration, the panel switches from him being angry to him getting an evil smile on his face. So the man walks over to Brendan, who is dead on the floor, and he explains to Constantine the arrangement that he had with Brendan. He says, "Essentially, the arrangement was that Brendan Finn would gain the expertise and power to amass a collection of the finest drink ever tasted. I think you'll agree he did precisely that." And John says, "And you get his soul in return?" And the man answers, "Indeed, a rather old-fashioned arrangement, but he was an old-fashioned man. It appealed in a nostalgic way, I suppose. There was one little clause, though. Mr. Finn insisted that I take his soul by midnight on the day he died. If I didn't, the whole arrangement would be null and void, and he could go to heaven. I imagine he thought himself a great man indeed to bargain with the devil." And right after the man said that he needed to take the soul before midnight, John checks his watch and sees where it is, and it's not midnight yet. There's 10 minutes left. The man continues to speak. "That appealed too, and I indulged him, if only to sweeten the deal. A little extra incentive. I'm sure he dreamed of somehow outsmarting me. Many mortals think that way, I'm sure you're aware. But they don't outsmart me, and I'll tell you why. They're mortal. And to be mortal is to be stupid, proud, conceited, and ultimately pathetic." And he looks down at Brendan's body and says, "And there's nothing more pathetic than a drunkard." So during the speech, John has been thinking. He's come up with a plan. We don't really know it yet, but we know he's got something up his sleeve because he walks over to the Holy Guinness and gets a couple pints and says, 5 to midnight, mate. I've had a bit of an idea. Brendan there, he was really just an old piss artist. Pathetic, like you said. He thought he was king of the drinkers. Been there, seen it, drunk it, you know? So how about you and me have a drink here, yeah? Over his carcass. I've always wanted to have a drink with the devil, and old Brennan's gonna feel pretty stupid when he gets to hell and you tell him I pulled off the ultimate boozing feat. I'll have put his whole stupid life in the shade in 1 minute flat. And the dapper man looks at Constantine and says, Mr. Constantine, you are sly. A drink with the devil is nothing less than you deserve. And the best thing about this is, John's got something up his sleeve. So John drinks to his good health. They clink their glasses. They drink it down. We see John is making sure that the man drinks the entire glass. And when the man is finished, he says, Splendid. So that's what the old fool was up to, Magic stout. And then John wipes his mouth and he says, yeah, the candles keep the spell going, you see. It stops the stout from changing back to holy water. And the man goes, really? And then he realizes what he just heard and he says, what? And then John, with the biggest shit-eating grin on his face, kicks the altar table over and the candles fall on the ground and they go out. And that means that the stout that the man has just drunk has turned back into holy water inside of him. And I think they only said it once, but this is definitely supposed to be like a demon or the devil. So once the candles go out, like the instant they go out, all of a sudden he's screaming in agony because the holy water inside of him is burning him from the inside out. And John is having a blast watching this. He's got a very evil smile on his face. So he picks up a wine bottle that was in there and he walks over to the devil who's writhing in agony and he says, oh yeah, we never drank the wine, did we? And then he smashes the bottle on the stone wall and he walks over to the devil who has like a melted line from his stomach to his esophagus now. And he's still writhing in pain. So his body's still alive, but you can see his rib cage. You can see his stomach and intestines and everything, but they're like liquefied. And John takes the broken bottle and he says, good year, 1920. Here's to you, asshole. And he hits the demon in the face with the broken bottle. And the demon flies backwards and he lands in the pool of holy water. And then the devil just completely dissolves in that water. We see some blood possibly floating on the surface, but I'm assuming it will just dissolve away as it's burned by the holy water. So John, being pretty pleased with himself, gets his jacket on and he stares at the pool and the narration says, gone. Back to hell, howling and blubbering like a big bloody kid. And that's what happens when you're stupid, proud, conceited, and ultimately pathetic. And then he looks down at his watch and sees that there is a minute past midnight and the narration says, I did it. I did it, mate. Your arse is out of the fire. Your soul too. And John looks down at Brennan, smiling. And Brennan kind of has like a peaceful smile on his face too. And as John leaves, the narration says, somewhere far away there's a clink of glasses. For a moment I had felt young again, like the booze had brought back the Constantine that used to be. The bastard who strutted about the place like he was king, just throwing down the gauntlet. And because I was drunk, I just lifted it and shoved it up his arrogant arse. But I'm in trouble. He'll be flaming mad down there, and what he'll do to me when I show up doesn't even bear thinking about. Before this, I didn't want to die. Now I don't dare. No more pissing about then. Time to get serious or desperate, depending on your point of view. And as John leaves Brendan's house, he takes a bottle of nice whiskey, and he walks out down the road and into the shadowy night. And that is the end of the issue. And I gotta say, this right here is one of my favorite Hellblazer issues of all time. Garth Ennis really nails like the attitude of John in this, and I love the way that he's able to trick the devil and also save his friend's soul at the same time. So if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planetrainsandcomicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.